Good morning. My name is Therese Emmanuel Gray, and I wanted to share with you a teaching that we were discussing last night in one of our meditation and teaching groups. This teaching is so relevant to what is going on in our personal lives and in the world today that I felt compelled to share it with a larger number of people. What we're talking about here is the consciousness behind the energy veil or evil that we see going on in the world and in our own being. And what we learn from this teaching is that these patterns in our psychology and these patterns in the collective psyche are actually going way back to a certain event that took place in the macrocosm and in the microcosm that began with the fall of these beings called Watchers. Now, the Watchers were ascended beings who decided to fall into the earth because they lusted after the daughters of men. And this teaching is a teaching that we find in bits and pieces in the Bible, but it is covered in much greater detail in the book of Enoch. The book of Enoch, which was not included in the Bible. And the book that I am referring to here, that is giving me this teaching, is a book that was written by Elizabeth Clare Prophet called Fallen Angels and the Origin of Evil. I'm going to put it here on the screen so that you can see this book. It's actually a very important book. Another book that I highly recommend that goes hand in hand with this is the book by Taylor Caldwell called Dialogues with the Devil, that gives a description of the conversation that took place between Archangel Michael and the fallen Archangel Lucifer. And we do have a series of videos on that book because it is such an important teaching for our time. Before we go into this any further, I am going to begin by reading part of the description that Elizabeth Clare Prophet wrote on this book. The book tracks Enoch's footsteps back to antiquity's timelessness, back to the first hint of corruption upon a pristine world, Earth. The trouble began, according to the Book of Enoch, when the heavenly angels and their leader named Samyasa developed an insatiable lust for the daughters of men upon earth, and an irrepressible desire to beget children by these women. Samyasa feared to descend alone to the daughters of men, and so he convinced 200 angels called Watchers to accompany him on his mission of pleasure. Then the angels took oaths and bound themselves to the undertaking by mutual execrations, curses. Once such a pact was sealed, betrayal was punishable by unnamed horrors. It's interesting to note the fear of the ones who have fallen, the fear of God that becomes this terror, and their needing to go at it together. In their gang-inspired bravado, the angels descended and took wives from among the daughters of men. They taught women sorcery, incantations, and divinations, twisted versions of the secrets of heaven. Now, one of the reasons we want to talk about this teaching today is because we need to understand that this fall that took place among a group of angels, or archangels, angelic hierarchs, called Watchers, is that this fall and this consciousness is woven into the fabric of the psyche of everyone upon earth, and especially the light bearers, and we're going to get into this. And so we're all dealing to some degree with this fall and with this consciousness, and we need to be able to recognize it so that we can remove it from our consciousness. It's the pulling out of the tares among the wheat of our consciousness in the folds of our own garment. And what we see even among the older sons and daughters of God are these patterns come again. We understand that we have been here many lifetimes. We have been together many lifetimes in various mandalas and groups of purpose, divine purpose, and also for the working out of our karma. We were there as the early Israelites. We were there even before that on Atlantis. And then more recently, there were specific groupings that took place that were very important in terms of world history. And two that I'm thinking of particularly that tie into this record are the times of the mystery school at King Arthur's court, the original King Arthur's court, which was the time of the Knights of the Round Table, and then also the time of Louis XIV and Versailles, and that group of individuals and karma. And so we can also see it, of course, in the ancient days of Egypt, and we can see how people used incantations, they used sorcery, divination to create havoc within the body of God, within the light bearers who were incarnated at that time. We can see it in the women of Camelot. We can see it in the women of the court of Louis XIV. And we can see it even in the ancient days of Egypt, the time of Akhenaten. The divine plan was curtailed or destroyed by the misuse of the spoken word. And we have to be cautious even in this age, where we have been given the science of the spoken word. We know the power of affirmations and decrees, and there are people who have a great momentum in that, who can misuse it when their consciousness is not in alignment with God's will. When self-righteousness takes over and they use the word, and the decree or the affirmation becomes skewed in its vibration, and the decreeing against certain individuals, for example, becomes literally what is spoken of in this book, the twisted version of the secrets of heaven. The book continues here. The plot thickens like a science fiction thriller, easier to take as fantasy than as fact. The women conceive children from these angels, evil giants. The giants devour all the food that the men of earth can produce. Nothing satiates their hunger. Now, this whole idea of not being satiated is a very important understanding of the psychology of the fall. When we take even the Rolling Stones song, I Can't Get No Satisfaction, this is part of that psychology, the part within each and every one that has fallen and that cannot find that peace, cannot find that satisfaction because of an insatiable hunger. And we have to look within first, and then we can look and see how it's represented in outside events, circumstances, and people. But like Jesus said, take the log out of your own eye first. That's what we can do. That's where we really have the ability to make change in the world. They kill and eat birds, beasts, reptiles, and fish. To their gargantuan appetites, nothing is sacrosanct. Soon even Homo sapiens becomes a delicacy. It is something that is embedded deep in the psyche and consciousness of man. And if we take, for example, the movie Silence of the Lambs, that so many people have seen, so many teens and preteens have seen, that movie, which is a horrendous movie, literally enshrines this consciousness in the consciousness of the people, in the collective psyche. as being something that becomes on some level normalized, on some level penetrates that consciousness. And so we have to understand that what takes place in movies and motion pictures to a great degree is lived by the psyche of the individual. When we watch a movie, that movie penetrates into our psyche, and we have to overcome it just like if we had lived the event live. It registers at the subconscious, unconscious, and we have to then clean it up and distinguish between the world of movies and the world of reality, but also understand that there really isn't that much of a demarcation as far as the psyche is concerned. And so we have to take these things very seriously and understand that only because of the grace of God and the prayer of the faithful and true, these movies do not have a greater devastating effect and outpicturing in the collective psyche. As the story goes, one spiteful angel named Azazel creates accoutrement for their consorts, like eye makeup and fancy bracelets to enhance their sex appeal. As for the men, Azazel teaches them every species of iniquity, including the means for making swords, knives, shields, breastplates, all the instruments of war. We know from the teachings of the Ascended Masters that Jesus was embodied as King David. King David was his final lifetime before he became the avatar of the Piscean Age. And there was an episode in the life of King David where this thread of the fallen angels, this thread of the Watcher consciousness was still in him and had to be plucked out in that life, and then in the last life as Jesus, he has sorted it out, he has dealt with it, and he is able to say, the devil comes and finds nothing in me. In the life of King David, David had many wives, but he was especially fond of this one individual called Bathsheba. And so in order to make Bathsheba one of his wives, he sent Bathsheba's husband to war and sent him to the front lines so that he would be killed, which he was, and then was able to take Bathsheba unto himself. And so we see here that this very psychology that's being depicted as both, on the one hand, the lusting after the women, on the other hand, the expansion of war, we see those two threads in that life of King David and his own falling on this very point. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because we all have circumstances and situations that come up in our life where a certain karma is unleashed or a certain vulnerability has to be overcome. And we have to recognize what these patterns are so that we can better deal with them. We must not judge, like Jesus said to Mary Magdalene, "Woman, where are thy accusers?" And then he says, "I do not accuse you either." And I was meditating on that statement that he made to her, and I realized that the reason he said this as well was because he was not without sin either. He said, "He who is without sin cast the first stone." And whether it was in that lifetime earlier or in past lives, he had the awareness that he too had wrestled with sin. And neither did he accuse her. And then he said, "Go and sin no more." And that is what we're all intended to do and follow as the example. Continuing here. There, millennia ago, someone explained war. not as a man-invented or God-sent plague, but as a vengeful act of a fallen angel barred from the plains of God's power. The implication is that man, through one form of manipulation or another, latched onto the war games of the fallen angels and allowed himself to commit genocide in defense of their arch-rivalries. Now, this is something going on in the world today. If we look at what's going on in the Middle East, if we look at what's going on with the drug cartels, if we look at the different plans and patterns of war that are happening around the world and that are mitigated by our prayers, we can see that this infighting, that this sending light bearers to fight against each other for agendas that are dark, is something that has been going on for centuries. There was a famous person, and I'm sorry I don't remember the name right now, who said, war is about people who know each other and don't fight each other, who send people out there who don't know each other to kill each other. So the people who know each other don't kill each other, but they send people out there who don't know each other to kill each other. And I'm paraphrasing, but basically we can see this. The point is that light bearers get caught up in these arch rivalries and shed their blood, which is their light, for the purposes of these fallen ones who are in positions of power and even incarnated as the leaders of various nations and organizations and places. And the light bearers spill their blood and light for these causes that are not justified in God, but are justified at a human level. I want to read to you a quote that came across my email this morning, sent from a friend. It's a very important quote by Saint Germain that completely ties into what we're talking about here. I'm going to read this to you now. The fallen ones have come from many systems of worlds and from the 12th planet, for they must have the victory on planet Earth if they are to proceed in an order across the universes for the destruction of other planetary homes. This is the planet most prepared and most equipped to meet this challenge, and I have given my life many times over, and the gift of the seventh ray and the violet flame, the keepers of the flame of freedom, might be aligned for the victory at this crucial hour, and I thank God for you, and for so many who have responded to the call on paths of raising the consciousness in service to the Lord, East and West. I, Saint Germain, have come to you, for the fallen ones have made their move, and we can do naught but respond. We must therefore go on the offensive before they commence theirs. If their strategy is, and indeed it is, to launch a surprise first strike against the United States and to take Europe by land war, then I say we must strike first, and we must strike at the etheric, mental, astral, and physical levels, that there be no power unto these fallen ones to complete that which they have purposed to do. I have come to you, therefore, with a single chess move of the day and the hour, according to your ability to hear me, to understand and to believe that the all-power of God is upon you, for the word that you exercise is the word with Brahman in the beginning. It is the mighty word of which you shall one day be the full incarnation. The word of God is unto you power this day, wise dominion, and a love fire that does consume all that is unlike love. Blessed ones, it is not merely a question of when will be war, or will there be war, or will there not be a war. It is a question of a war of what intensity. Shall it be mitigated by 5%, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80%? Where shall the percentages lie? Shall it be removed 100%? You see, there are so many options, and day by day, as you choose to make the call and to recognize the empowerment we give you through your holy Christ self, so you shall determine the percentages, and you shall make the difference. Therefore, let not your advancement on the path or your supposed advancement take you from the true walk of the saints of all ages. Be willing to give, and give again, for I, Saint Germain, make you this promise, that those who stand and still stand with me, and with Omritas in these hours giving tireless calls of the violet flame and other calls that you give, shall have a reward personally from me, from my causal body, that shall be great indeed. And it shall be great indeed because my gratitude to you shall be great indeed, forever and forever. So we need to invoke that violet flame, that gift of the seventh ray. We have a website, if you would like to take a look at it, called Violet Flame Miracles, violetflamemiracles.com, and there's a little book called The Miracle Violet Flame. It will tell you everything you need to know about the violet flame, and you're welcome also to join us on Blog Talk Radio and on Facebook, where we give that violet flame, the violet flame of freedom. Now I'm going to go back to this book. But there is more to Enoch's account of the watchers. When the men of earth cry out against the atrocities heaped upon them, heaven hears their plea. The mighty archangels, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, Suriel, and Uriel, appeal on behalf of earth's people before the Most High, the King of Kings. The Lord orders Raphael to bind Azazel hand and foot. Gabriel is sent to destroy the children of fornication, the offspring of the watchers, by inciting them to their own self-destruction and mutual slaughter. Michael is then authorized to bind Samyasa and his wicked offspring for 70 generations underneath the earth, even to the day of judgment. And God sends the great flood to wipe out the evil giants, the children of the watchers. But in succeeding generations, after the sinking of the continent of Atlantis, the giants return once again to haunt mankind. Likewise, it seems that the watchers will hold power over man in some curiously undefined way until the final judgment of these angels comes, which the author implies is long overdue. We're in this time of the turning of cycles. We have entered the age of Aquarius. We are in this time where this entire drama is going to wrap itself up. And this holding of power over man in some curiously undefined way is what we are dealing with today, what we are looking at in terms of the overcoming of those threads of consciousness, the pulling out of those threads of consciousness within ourselves and within all of those who hear this message. And of course, we know that we are one, therefore any shift that we make personally affects the entire body of God upon earth, and that is why even one person making the shift makes a difference. So it's all right if you are one and alone, because you are one in God, and alone is another way of saying all one. Now we have in the next part of the book of Enoch the account of how the watchers then go to Enoch and say, hey, you're a holy man, please go petition the Lord for us. In chapter 12 of the book, the Lord says to Enoch, scribe of righteousness, go tell the watchers of heaven who have deserted the lofty sky and their holy everlasting station, who have been polluted with women, and have done as the sons of men do by taking to themselves wives, and have been greatly corrupted on the earth, that on earth they shall never obtain peace and remission of sin, for they shall not rejoice in their offspring. They shall behold the slaughter of their beloved, shall lament for the destruction of their sons, and shall petition forever, but shall not obtain mercy and peace. Chapter 13 also describes how the watchers became terrified and trembled, and besought Enoch to write for them a prayer for forgiveness, that he might cause that prayer to ascend to God, since they themselves could not address him on account of their offense, their sins being so grievous. Enoch then reports to the watchers, I have written your petition, and in my vision it has been shown to me that what you request will not be granted as long as the world endures. Judgment has been passed upon you. Your request will not be granted you. From this time forward, never shall you ascend into heaven. He has said that on the earth he will bind you as long as the world endures. But before these things you shall behold the destruction of your beloved sons. You shall not possess them, but they shall fall before you by the sword. Neither shall you entreat for them, not for yourselves, but you shall weep and supplicate in silence. In chapter 15, the glorious and the effulgent, the Lord God speaks again to the righteous Enoch. Go say to the watchers of heaven who have sent thee to pray for them, you ought to pray for men, and not men for you. You being spiritual, holy, and possessing a life which is eternal, have polluted yourselves with women, have begotten in carnal blood, have lusted in the blood of men, and have done as those who are flesh and blood do. These, however, die and perish. Therefore have I given to them wives, that they might cohabitate with them, that sons might be born of them, that they might be transacted upon earth. But you from the beginning were made spiritual, possessing a life which is eternal, and not subject to death forever. Therefore I made not wives for you, because spiritual your dwelling is in heaven. Now what we have to understand here then is that we're dealing with a different race of individuals, spiritually speaking. We are dealing with beings who were ascended and who chose to leave that ascended state in order to fall and to corrupt themselves on earth, and to join the ranks of those who were mortal and intended to ascend. So we have the evolution of the children of God, the sons and daughters of God, who are ascending back to God through initiations and rounds of rebirth on earth. And then we have those who were already in heaven, who were the watchers, who decided, a number of them, to fall. And it was a usurping of their position, and for this reason the judgment was very harsh, is very harsh and final. And what we have to understand then is that the watchers take that revenge that they have for God and then put it on the children of God, the sons and daughters of God evolving on earth. And this is where we have to understand how that relates to us. Now we're going to go to another section of the book that is also included, which is actually an excerpt of the Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. And this gives us an understanding of how the psychology of the watchers plays out in our day-to-day world. C.S. Lewis here is speaking of angels and fallen angels through Screwtape, who is a mouthpiece of the astral plane, of the planes of hell. It should be, but it is not unnecessary to add that a belief in angels, whether good or evil, does not mean a belief in either as they are represented in art and literature. Devils are depicted with bats' wings and good angels with birds' wings. Not because anyone holds that moral deterioration would be likely to turn feathers into membrane, but because most men like birds better than bats. My birds right now are really chirping, so they're affirming that. Then he says, I like bats much better than bureaucrats. I live in the managerial age, in the world of admin. The greatest evil is not now done in those sordid dens of crime that Dickens loved to paint. It is not even done in concentration camps and labor camps. In those we see its final result. But it is conceived and ordered, moved, seconded, carried, and minuted in clean, carpeted, warmed, and well-lighted offices, by quiet men with white collars and cut fingernails and smooth-shaven cheeks who do not need to raise their voice. Hence, naturally enough, my symbol for hell is something like the bureaucracy of a police state or the offices of a thoroughly nasty business concern. On the surface, manners are normally suave. Rudeness to one's superiors would obviously be suicidal. Rudeness to one's equals might put them on their guard before you were ready to spring your mind, for of course dog eat dog is the principle of the whole organization. Everyone wishes everyone else's discrediting, demotion, and ruin. Everyone is an expert in the confidential report, the pretended alliance, the stab in the back. Over all this, their good manners, their expression of grave respect, their tributes to one another's invaluable services, form a thin crust. Every now and then it gets punctured, and the scalding lava of their hatred spurts out. Can you see here that what he is describing is what many people have to deal with on the job? It's the culture of hell and the threads of this fallen watcher consciousness that have basically infiltrated every aspect of professional life, and the consciousness of evil that is rampant in everyone, that we have to curtail, that we have to overcome, that we have to weed out of ourselves. And we might say, well, this is for people who are living in the world, working in the world. He's not talking about older souls here and the chosen ones of God who spend their time praying and decreeing. The truth is that even in the highest spiritual circles, whenever we're having this, what Jesus has called vain competition, where we seek to outdo one another in some way, whether it's conscious, subconscious, or unconscious, whenever we do not basically encourage the divine plan and God flourishing in others as well as in ourselves, we are engaging in that consciousness. And to some extent, it's a measure of our spirituality to see if we can truly have goodwill towards the brethren. Goodwill. And in order to have that goodwill, we have to uproot these threads of consciousness that are based on this vain competition and are fed by the lower archies of the astral plane. Bad angels, like bad men, are entirely practical. They have two motives. The first is fear of punishment. For as totalitarian countries have their camps for torture, so my hell contains deeper hells, its houses of correction. Now, can you see how that plays out also in the physical plane, where people are motivated by fear and also by the desire to keep others under their thumb through a fear-based mentality? And so he's going to explain what happens next. Their second motive is a kind of hunger. I feign that devils can, in a spiritual sense, eat one another and us. Even in human life we have seen the passion to dominate, almost to digest one's fellow, to make his whole intellectual and emotional life merely an extension of one's own, to hate one's hatreds and resent one's grievances and indulge one's egoism through him as well as through oneself. His own little store of passion must of course be suppressed to make room for ours. If he resists this suppression, he is being very selfish. On earth, this desire is often called, quote, love. Now, I had to smile when I read this because I can see how this is what we have been trained to believe is love, the desire to dominate one another. There's a saying once that says, if you love someone, set them free. And we have to look at how people have been trained, even in school, to basically have their opinions and their beliefs take over other people's, this power of persuasion, whether it's in debate clubs or in writing and speaking classes. And of course, some of this can be used for God's purposes if it is truly in the place of the heart that is the middle way, and that is not a desire to put your will over another person's free will. We have to educate, we have to teach, we have to preach, and then we have to let people make their own decision. However, when we try and convince people and manipulate people and use massive forms of mind control, whether it's at a conscious, subconscious, or unconscious level, even praying for people without truly invoking God's will, decreeing against people, and so forth. When all of these things are taking place, we're actually engaging in this sin that Saint Germain described in his book, The Holy Trinisophia. He talked about two of the greatest sins, two of the greatest traps that light bearers can fall into. The first is the imperious craving to aspire to astonishment and admiration, the imperious craving, and that's something we all have to learn to overcome. And the second one, which he said is much worse, is the desire to exercise power over others in a way that strips from them their free will. And it's basically a bullying at a very deep psychological level. Now, when we look at what's going on in all of the different forms of media, whether it's the debates on Fox News or the Jon Stewart show or the Glenn Beck show, all of these different places. Yes, we can have good information come out of these places that we need to use to make our free will evaluation and prayer regarding a circumstance, but there is always an agenda that is associated with these shows, which has to do with, I am going to convince you, and it's a game. It becomes a game where people seek to basically railroad others into their own belief, and it's not so much about convincing people to change their ways from a higher perspective of truth and love and enlightenment, as it is this game that says, I win, you lose, I win if I convince you. And there's a difference in vibration. And so we have to be aware of these games, and we have to literally catch ourselves when we are trying to engage in those games as well. And so, regarding love, in hell I feign that they recognize it as hunger, but there the hunger is more ravenous, and a fuller satisfaction is possible. There I suggest the stronger spirit, there are perhaps no bodies to impede the operation, can really and irrevocably suck the weaker into itself and permanently gorge its own being on the weaker's outraged individuality. It is, I feign, for this that devils desire human souls and the souls of one another. It is for this that Satan desires all of his own followers and all the sons of Eve and all the hosts of heaven. His dream is of a day when all shall be inside him, and all that say I can say it only through him. This, I surmise, is the bloated spider parody, the only imitation he can understand of that unfathomed bounty whereby God turns tools into servants and servants into sons, so that they may be at last reunited to him in the perfect freedom of a love offered from the height of the utter individualities which he has liberated them to be. What an important teaching we have here. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on it, because what we're saying here is the juxtaposition of the true law of love, the heavenly law of love, where through the oneness of the body of God, through oneness in Christ, we are one. And through the Master who sponsors us, we are one with every other ascended being in heaven. There's a teaching by clairvoyant and theosophist Charles Ledbetter called Placing the Master in the Center of Your Circle, where you literally let your Master, your sponsoring Master, the being in heaven who works with you, become the center of your circle of your consciousness. And this is akin to the teaching that Jesus gave to St. Margaret Mary, where he told her, explained to her, that she would fare off better if she gave that mantra that we can all give. Thou the all, I the nothing. Thou the all, I the nothing. And so we place God as the all, and we place our own human desires and wishes and willings as the nothing or the secondary. We put everything into the hands of the Master, like that song. Put your hand in the hand of the one who still the waters, right? So this is the true path of love. And in the arch deceiver's parody of that path, the counterfeit path, there is this wanting to take over and devour through all kinds of influences the consciousness, the being, the light, the free will of other people's individuality. And this feeding on people, this parasitism, takes place in so many ways. It takes place in every magazine that we find at the checkout counter in the stores, grabbing your attention. Your attention is your light. What you put your attention on, you feed. And so grabbing your attention that way, also we see it in the way that people are trained in the college system and the high school system, and it's all about training people in a certain way that they might follow in that indoctrination. We see it, of course, in the military, and we see it in all of the forms of mass thought control that are out there in the entertainment industry, the movies that come out. What's the indoctrination behind them? What's the goal behind them? There's typically a goal, and most movies unfortunately have a negative agenda because they are literally funded and supplied from the astral plane. And those who are the light bearers in Hollywood and other places who make movies tend to be those who are persecuted ultimately. And so we have to keep that in mind. We have to keep in mind the beast that feeds the industry, just like the music industry and so forth. And of course the field of politics, the government, the elections. Another aspect that I wanted to comment on with this feeding is where we have a situation where older sons and daughters of God literally feed upon the carcass of what has gone before. The carcass of the light, the teachings, the supply that has been anchored in the earth, and where people who have been on the path and in the teachings for years and years and decades find that they get into this frenzy of thirsting after power, after control, after money, instead of going back to the source of their I am presence and what they have been taught. And I say this without pointing any fingers because we are all in danger of that if we do not walk very carefully. We do not know when a karma will erupt that can take us off the path and pretend to be the path. And we're filled with such a self-righteousness that we are blinded. We are blinded. And so we have to pray for our brethren. We have to pray for every light bearer, every son and daughter of God, and especially those who have fallen in this trap lifetime after lifetime, those who are the older souls, those who have come to a place once again of choice. Because we're dealing with the records of the fall of Atlantis, we're dealing with the records of the fall of Lemuria, we're dealing with the records of the fall of the mystery schools, and we're dealing with this place and choice and time and space where people have to say, I've slipped down this slippery slope many times, and this time my karma, my circumstance is set up so that I have a choice. And by God, I am going to turn around this time. This time. And so having said this, we're going to describe that slippery slope. That's where the book takes us next. And this is very exciting and empowering material because we can understand the fall and then we can have the tools to overcome that fall one by one by one. And if we do not know what we're being played against, if we do not know the game that is happening, which is really not a game, but the life or death of souls, we can't win, we can't ascend back to God. And so this is why we're going to be talking about this next. I'm now going to move into the third part of the teaching. This is a record that is extremely important because it's up right now. It's up individually and collectively. This is to the sons of Jared, prologue on the sons of Jared taken from the second book of Adam and Eve, beginning with chapter 19. The children of Jared are led astray. This teaching pits the light bearers, who are the children of Jared, with those who have already fallen, who are the children of the watchers, and are called here the children of Cain. Then God revealed to him, Jared, again, the promise he had made to Adam. He explained to him the 5,500 years and revealed unto him the mystery of his coming upon the earth. And God said to Jared, As to that fire which thou hast taken from the altar to light the lamp withal, let it abide with you to give light to the bodies, and let it not come out of the cave until the body of Adam comes out of it. Now here we have a literal story that may, it seems, have taken place before that sinking of Atlantis, but we also have a metaphorical teaching. We know that the cave is the secret chamber of the heart. We know that the fire is the fire of the threefold flame, the fire of God that burns within the heart in that secret place of fire. And we know that the body of Adam is also the body of Adam Kadmon that Kabbalists refer to. And we want to see that body of Adam Kadmon restored. So we can take this story on two levels. And both levels lead us to a greater illumination and awareness. But, O Jared, take care of the fire, that it burn bright in the lamp, neither go thou again out of the cave until thou receivest an order through a vision, and not in an apparition when seen by thee. Then command again thy people not to hold intercourse with the children of Cain, and not to learn their ways, for I am God, who loves not hatred and works of iniquity. God gave also many other commandments to Jared, and blessed him, and then withdrew his word from him. Then Jared drew near with his children, took some fire, and came down to the cave, and lighted the lamp before the body of Adam, and he gave his people commandments as God had told him to do. This sign happened to Jared at the end of his 450th year, as did also many other wonders we do not record. But we record only this one for shortness' sake, and in order not to lengthen our narrative. And Jared continued to teach his children 80 years, but after that they began to transgress the commandments he had given them, and to do many things without his counsel. They began to go down from the holy mountain one after another, and to mix with the children of Cain in foul fellowships. Now the reason for which the children of Jared went down the holy mountain is this, that we will now reveal unto you. Now here we have the story, archetypally speaking, of the fall of the light bearers who leave the mystery school. We see that time and time again, after a certain number of years passes, people leave the true teaching. They may have an outer organization, but they leave the true flame because of this very danger in consciousness. And so we have to look at this and say, what was the flame of my teacher? What was the flame of Jesus? What was the flame of my guru? What was the flame? And am I holding on to that flame? Have I become the Word made flesh? Or am I simply following a rote ritual and calling that good enough? Am I becoming my teacher as Elijah and Elisha? As Elisha became the very being of Elijah and received that double mantle. This is our calling in every mystery school, in every Guru Chela relationship. And we see time and time again that after a certain passing of time, different organizations, different movements of light become corrupted. In fact, Mark Prophet once said, it only takes about 30 years for fallen angels to infiltrate an organization and corrupt it. And so we can see this happening time and time again, and we have to be on guard. We have to be aware so that we can overcome that corruption. And that overcoming begins in our own being first, as we take an accurate assessment of what's going on and we say, oh, these patterns have to be extricated from my own consciousness. And then, like Jesus, I can say, the devil comes and finds nothing in me. So we'll read the summary here. It's very pertinent, and then we're going to read the whole thing. Ravishing music, strong drink loosed among the sons of Cain. They don colorful clothing. The children of Seth look on with longing eyes. They revolt from wise counsel. They descend the mountain into the valley of iniquity. They cannot ascend the mountain again. Now we know this mountain is also the mountain of our mighty I Am Presence. It's the consciousness that we have of oneness with God and what would take us down from that consciousness. There was a dictation once by Mother Mary where she talks about how the angels fell from heaven because those that had already fallen were projecting images up into the etheric plane using devices that are similar to motion picture. Basically, they were projecting movies up into the etheric plane to literally pull the angels who had not yet fallen down into the earth. And so curiosity killed the cat, and this is what we have again and again, the enticing and this serpentine lie that says, you shall not surely die. You can go check it out. You shall not surely die. And then we find that, like Adam and Eve cast from the garden, we are naked. We have lost our aura of oneness with God. We have lost the deathless solar garment, and we have to weave it, build it once again. After Cain had gone down to the land of dark soil, and his children had multiplied therein, there was one of them whose name was Jenan, son of Lamech, the blind, who slew Cain. But as this Jenan, Satan came unto him in his childhood, and he made sundry trumpets and horns and string instruments, cymbals and psalteries, and lyres and harps and flutes, and he played on them at all times and at every hour. And when he played on them, Satan came into them, so that from among them were heard beautiful and sweet sounds that ravished the heart. Then he gathered companies upon companies to play on them, and when they played, it pleased well the children of Cain, who inflamed themselves with sin among themselves, and burnt as with fire, while Satan inflamed their hearts one with another, and increased lust among them. So we see here that there is this awareness of music, and the use of music here to literally ensnare instead of liberate. And we have to really understand in this age the importance of music as a divine vehicle to liberate the soul, not to ensnare the soul. And this record is up so that we can deal with it and overcome. Satan also taught Jenan to bring strong drink out of corn, meaning make alcohol. And this Jenan used to bring together companies upon companies in drink houses, and brought into their hands all manner of fruits and flowers, and they drank together. Thus did this Jenan multiply sin exceedingly. He also acted with pride, and taught the children of Cain to commit all manner of the grossest wickedness which they knew not, and put them up to manifold doings which they knew not before. Then Satan, when he saw that they yielded to Jenan and hearkened to him, and everything he told them, rejoiced greatly, increased Jenan's understanding, until he took iron, and with it made weapons of war. And when they were drunk, hatred and murder increased among them. One man used violence against another to teach him evil, taking his children and defiling them before him. And when men saw that they were overcome, and saw others who were not overpowered, those who were beaten came to Jenan, took refuge with him, and he made him confederates. Then sin increased among them greatly, until a man married his own sister or daughter or mother, and others, or the daughter of his father's sister, so that there was no more distinction in relationship. And they no longer knew what is iniquity, but did wickedly, and the earth was defiled with sin, and they angered God at the judge who had created them. But Jenan gathered together companies upon companies that played on horns and on all other instruments we have already mentioned at the foot of the holy mountain, and they did so in order that the children of Seth, who were on the holy mountain, should hear it. But when the children of Seth heard the noise, they wondered, and came by companies, and stood on the top of the mountain to look to those below, and they did thus a whole year. When at the end of that year Jenan saw that they were being won over to him little by little, Satan entered into him, and taught him to make dyeing stuffs for garments of diverse patterns, and made him understand how to dye crimson and purple and what not. And the sons of Cain who wrought all this, and shone in beauty and gorgeous apparel, gathered together at the foot of the mountain in splendor, with horns and gorgeous dresses and horse races, committing all manner of abominations. Meanwhile the children of Seth, who were on the holy mountain, prayed and praised God in the place of the hosts of angels who had fallen, wherefore God called them angels, because he rejoiced over them greatly. But after this they no longer kept his commandment, nor held by the promise he had made to their fathers, but they relaxed from their fasting and praying, and from the counsel of Jared their father. And they kept on gathering together on the top of the mountain to look upon the children of Cain from morning until evening, and upon what they did, upon their beautiful dresses and ornaments. Then the children of Cain looked up from below and saw the children of Seth standing in troops on the top of the mountain, and they called to them to come down to them. But the children of Seth said to them from above, "We don't know the way." Then Jenan the son of Lamech heard them say they did not know the way, and he bethought himself how he might bring them down. Then Satan appeared to him by night, saying, "There is no way for them to come down from the mountain on which they dwell, but when they come tomorrow, say to them, Come ye to the western side of the mountain, where you will find the way of a stream of water that comes down to the foot of the mountain between two hills. Come down that way to us." And so we see here the coming down of the mountain again. It's both literal and metaphorical, finding another way to entice the soul to come down, to come down. Then when it was day, Jenan blew the horns and beat the drums below the mountain, as he was wont. The children of Seth heard it, and came as they used to do. Then Jenan said to them from down below, "Go to the western side of the mountain, there you will find the way to come down." You can see how the fallen ones appear to be friends, appear to give friendly advice, appear to care, and this is one of those things that we have to really watch out for, because it's easy to get caught up in that and deceived by that. Everyone wants a friend to care for them and look after them. But when the children of Seth heard these words from him, they went back into the cave to Jared to tell him all they had heard. And when Jared heard it, he was grieved, for he knew they would transgress his counsel. After this 100 men of the children of Seth gathered together and said among themselves, "Come, let us go down to the children of Cain and see what they do, and enjoy ourselves with them." But when Jared heard this of the 100 men, his very soul was moved, and his heart was grieved. He then arose with great fervor, and stood in the midst of them, and adjured them by the blood of Abel the just, "Let not one of you go down from this holy and pure mountain in which our fathers have ordered us to dwell." But when Jared saw that they did not receive his words, he said unto them, "O my good and innocent and holy children, know that when once you go down from this holy mountain, God will not allow you to return again to it." He again adjured them, saying, "I adjure by the death of our father Adam, and by the blood of Abel, of Seth, of Enos, of Canaan, and of Mahalalel, to hearken to me, and not to go down from this holy mountain. For the moment you leave it, you will be reft of life and of mercy, and you shall no longer be called children of God, but children of the devil, children of the deified energy veil." But they would not hearken to his words. Enoch at that time was already grown up, and in his zeal for God he arose and said, "Hear me, O ye sons of Seth, great and small, when ye transgress the commandment of our fathers, and go down from his holy mountain, ye shall not come up hither again forever." But they rose up against Enoch, and would not hearken to his words, and went down from the holy mountain. And when they looked at the daughters of Cain, at their beautiful figures, and at their hands and feet dyed with color and tattooed in ornaments on their faces, the fire of sin was kindled in them. Then Satan made them look most beautiful before the sons of Seth, as he also made the sons of Seth appear of the fairest in the eyes of the daughters of Cain, so that the daughters of Cain lusted after the sons of Seth like ravenous beasts, and the sons of Seth after the daughters of Cain, until they had committed abomination with them. But after they had thus fallen into this defilement, they returned by the way they had come, and tried to ascend the holy mountain, but they could not, because the stones of that holy mountain were of fire flashing before them, by reason of which they could not go up again. Meaning that their vibration had fallen to the place where the vibration of that mountain became as a burning heat, a burning fire. We've been told that the fire of God, even the violet flame, burns that which is impure, burns the records, burns the transgression, and that when we have given enough violet flame, when we have invoked the sacred fire enough, and have a momentum of light in our being, it is no longer a burning sensation, but a cool sensation. And so we see here that as they descended from consciousness and entered this consciousness of defilement and of compromise, they can no longer take the heat of the fire of God because they're no longer vibrating at that same level, and so the fire literally burns them. And God was angry with them and repented of them because they had come down from glory and therefore lost or forsaken their own purity or innocence and were fallen into the defilement of sin. This coming down from glory, we have to think about this glory, the glow ray, the golden pink glow ray of God, coming down from that consciousness of glory that we had in our oneness with God. We have to understand that in this age, this dawning age of Aquarius, with the violet flame, with the teachings of soul liberation that we have an unprecedented opportunity through the winds of the Holy Spirit, in this age of the Holy Spirit, to ascend back that mountain of God. We have been told in dictations by the Ascended Masters that some of these ones who are the old souls are these very, very heavy birds, and I have to say I put myself in that category too. I know I am an old soul, and the Masters have said it has taken lifetimes for you to get to the place where the Holy Spirit is strong enough for you to be able to rise up out of the ashes like the phoenix rises out of the ashes, and to not be as these dodo birds basically stuck in the bottom of the mountain and being pulled towards the pit. So we see there is an entire mandala of older souls that in this age of the Holy Spirit is intended to come up out of that consciousness of Cain that can manifest through the misuse of power, the misuse of money, the misuse of entertainment, and all kinds of desires and lusts that are prevalent in the world around us. And we are truly submerged in this consciousness of Cain if we look at everything that is paraded around us as the way of life of this age. And so we have an unprecedented opportunity to leave it behind and go back up that mountain of God. And this is our choice, and this is why in this age we are given this final opportunity. For many people and many older souls, it is a final opportunity to decide which way we will turn. And this is why we have to understand the records so that we can make that choice and make the right choice and come up higher. Then God sent his word to Jared, saying, These thy children, whom thou didst call my children, behold, they have transgressed my commandment, and have gone down to the abode of perdition and of sin. Send a messenger to those who are left, that they may not go down and be lost. But Jared wept before the Lord and asked of him mercy and forgiveness, but he wished that his soul might depart from his body rather than hear these words from God about the going down of his children from the holy mountain. But he followed God's order and preached unto them not to go down from that holy mountain, and not to hold intercourse with the children of Cain. But they heeded not his message and would not obey his counsel. After this another company gathered together, and they went to look after their brethren, but they perished as well as they. And so it was, company after company. Only a few of them were left. Remember a situation once where Elizabeth Clare Prophet was on the altar, Guru Ma, and she said, 90% of you will leave me. Who are those who are willing to stay? It does not necessarily mean to stay physically. It means to stay in consciousness with the consciousness that came through her. Then Jared sickened from grief, and his sickness was such that the day of his death drew near. Then he called Enoch his eldest son, and Methuselah Enoch's son, and Lamech the son of Methuselah, and Noah the son of Lamech. And when they were come to him, he prayed over them and blessed them, and said to them, Ye are righteous, innocent sons, Go ye not down from this holy mountain, for behold, your children and your children's children have gone down from this holy mountain, and have estranged themselves from this holy mountain through their abominable lusts and transgression of God's commandment. But I know through the power of God that he will not leave you on this holy mountain, because your children have transgressed his commandment and that of our fathers, which we had received from them. But, O my son, God will take you to a strange land, and ye never shall return again to behold your eyes this garden and this holy mountain. Therefore, O my son, set your hearts on your own selves, and keep the commandment of God which is with you. And when you go from this holy mountain into a strange land which ye knew not, take with you the body of our father Adam, and with it these 3 precious gifts and offerings, namely the gold, the incense, and the myrrh, and let them be in the place where the body of our father Adam shall lay. This, the body of Adam, again, can be seen metaphorically as the body of Adam Kadmon, the original man. This is what the Kabbalists understood Adam represented, the original man, the man that we are all carved from. And we see here the gifts of gold, incense, and myrrh, which are the gifts of the 3 wise men brought to the Christ child. And so we see here that these gifts, which correspond to the threefold flame of love, wisdom, and power in the heart, the vibration of love coming through the myrrh, the vibration of Christ, wisdom coming through the gold, the vibration of divine power coming through the incense. These gifts are literally the outpicturing of the eternal presence of God in the heart, that is our Christ flame, that allows us through that flame, through that fire of the heart, to ascend back that mountain of God within our own microcosm as a mystical experience and return to God. This is what we're talking about here. We're talking about the buoying up of our auric field, the weaving of our deathless solar body, and the preparation for our soul's ascent into higher consciousness at the conclusion of this life, simply because we have work left to do here in physical embodiment. But this literal change, this going up the mountain, can happen at any time. We do not have to wait to be on our deathbed for this change to take place. It can take place now. We can be the living live, not the living dead. That's what this entire teaching is about. And unto him of you who shall be left, O my sons, shall the word of God come, and when he goes out of this land, he shall take with him the body of our father Adam, and shall lay it in the middle of the earth, the place in which salvation shall be wrought. Then Noah said unto him, Who is he of us that shall be left? And Jared answered, Thou art he that shall be left, and thou shalt take the body of our father Adam from the cave, and place it with thee in the ark when the flood comes. So you can see here the saving, the preserving of the body of Adam before that cataclysm, that karmic return that was the sinking of Atlantis, corresponds to the flood of Noah. In fact, in the book Romance of Atlantis, Taylor Caldwell, who tunes into the Akashic Records, speaks of this sinking of Atlantis, and also speaks of Noah and his followers leaving on a boat, on an ark. And so we see here that we're talking about the same event, which is a karmic return and a cataclysm that we pray will not happen in this age, either by water or by fire, simply because enough people take on the spiritual fire in their auras to mitigate and overturn the prophecy of a physical fire having to come upon Earth as a nuclear holocaust or any other manifestation of weapons of mass destruction. We do not have to have the blowing up of this planet like the blowing up of Maldek, which left that asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. We do not have to have planetary holocausts through fire. We can have the raising of the sacred fire within our being that will literally transmute that prophecy and create the coming in of the New Jerusalem, the holy city, the consciousness of the etheric plane tying into the physical plane and saving the earth. This happening one by one. Each person is like the pin that ties a tent down, actually I should say the tarp over the tent. If you look at a tarp and a tent, you see how that tarp is being pinned down? we can be those pins. We can pin down the tarp which is the consciousness of the holy city, New Jerusalem, descending. The New Jerusalem becoming the holy city, I should say. And so think of yourself as one of those tent pins. And thy son Shem, who shall come out of thy loins, he it is who shall lay the body of our father Adam in the middle of the earth, in the place whence salvation shall come. Then Jared turned to his son Enoch and said unto him, Thou, my son, abide in this cave, and minister diligently before the body of our father Adam all the days of thy life, and feed thy people in righteousness and innocence. And Jared said no more. His hands were loosened, his eyes closed, and he entered into rest like his fathers. His death took place in the 360th year of Noah, and in the 989th year of his own life, on the 12th Takas, on a Friday. But as Jared died, tears streamed down his face by reason of his great sorrow for the children of Seth who had fallen in his days. Then Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, and Noah, these four wept over him, embalmed him carefully, and then laid him in the cave of treasures. Then they rose and mourned for him 40 days. And when these days of mourning were ended, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, and Noah remained in sorrow of heart, because their father had departed from them, and they saw him no more. The final chapter here that we're going to read, chapter 22. Only 3 righteous men left in the world, the evil conditions of men prior to the flood. But Enoch kept the commandment of Jared, his father, and continued to minister in the cave. It is this Enoch to whom many wonders happened, and also he who wrote a celebrated book, but those wonders may not be told in this place. Then after this the children of Seth went astray and fell, they, their children, and their wives. And when Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, and Noah saw them, their hearts suffered by reason of their fall into doubt, full of unbelief, and they wept and sought of God mercy to preserve them and to bring them out of that wicked generation. Enoch continued his ministry before the Lord 385 years, and at the end of that time he became aware through the grace of God that God intended to remove him from the earth. He said then to his son, O my son, I know that God intends to bring the waters of the flood upon the earth and to destroy our creation. And ye are the last rulers over this people on the mountain. And ye are the last rulers over this people on this mountain, for I know that not one of you will be left to beget children on this holy mountain, neither shall any one of you rule over the children of his people, neither shall any great company be left of you on this mountain. Enoch said also to them, Watch over your souls, and hold fast by your fear of God, and by your service of him, and worship him in upright faith, and serve him in righteousness, innocence, and judgment, in repentance, and also in purity. When Enoch had ended his commandments to them, God transported him from that mountain to the land of life, to the mansions of the righteous and of the chosen, the abode of paradise of joy and light that reaches up to heaven, light that is outside the light of this world, for it is the light of God that contains the whole world, but which no place can contain. Thus, because Enoch was in the light of God, he found himself out of the reach of death until God would have him die. Altogether not one of our fathers or of their children remained on that holy mountain except for these 3, Methuselah, Lamech, and Noah. For all the rest went down from the mountain and fell into sin with the children of Cain. Therefore they were forbidden that mountain, and none remained on it but those 3 men. We see here the description of the ascension of Enoch, who ascended into heaven, made a physical ascension. This was likened to the ascension of Elijah, who was taken up in a chariot of fire. This is the process that we're all intended to follow. We can see here the challenge of ascending, and we can see why the Lords of Karma gave us this tremendous dispensation in this age, that we could balance 51% of our karma and ascend with 51% balanced, and then balance the rest of our karma from inner levels, from the etheric octaves of light. This is a tremendous dispensation, because back in these days you had to balance 100% of your karma to make it out of this plane and to ascend back to the height of the mountain of your own God being. And so we have the violet flame. We've been told that the violet flame, if we give it diligently, helps us to balance on average 1% of karma a year. And so if you find the violet flame and you give that violet flame diligently for 25, 30 years, you're likely to make your ascension in this life or the very next. And the reason for that is because if you're listening to this video, if you're even interested in these teachings in any way, you have balanced at least 25% of your karma. If you have not balanced at least 25% of your karma, you're not even drawn to these teachings yet. It's complete gibberish. So if you've endured to this place in the video and you start giving that violet flame diligently, you are very much likely to make your ascension in this life to balance the rest of your karma from the inner planes if need be. And you can ascend back that mountain of God. And we have been told it takes one ascension per year to hold the world stable, the earth stable, and to preserve this earth as a platform of evolution. One ascension a year. And so one soul making their transition and ascending back to God. And if we can have a number of souls who are literally walking the earth with their Christ self, literally walking the earth as pillars of fire, literally walking the earth even in a place where they could already have the ascension, meaning they are unascended beings, we can see a tremendous balance taking place and being held, and we can see the victory coming forth. And so we must not lose hope. We must understand that this record is up, that we are in the time where we have to revisit the conditions that led to the sinking of Atlantis, the misuse of science, the misuse of engineering, biological engineering, and also all manner of the creation of weapons of mass destruction, the misuse of music and rhythm, the misuse of the sacred fire of the Divine Mother through all forms of sexual misqualification and perversions. We have all of this come again. We have also the sin of abortion, the killing of life in the womb, and all of these sins against the holy innocents and the children of God. And we're in this time where we have to make a choice, and that choice is made individual by individual who receives the teaching, the enlightenment, and then says, thus far and no farther, I will no longer give my life, my attention, my supply, my allegiance to the fall, and to these fallen ones, and these original watchers, and the threads of the watchers within me, and within all life. We're going to pull the plug with our beloved Father Helios. We're going to pull the plug on the seed of the wicked, and we're simply no longer going to engage in that sympathy for the devil, for the deified energy veil. This is what we must do because we love God. We love God with all our heart, soul, and mind. We love God, and we love our neighbor as ourself. We are our neighbor. We are one. And when we make that change out of love for God, we are loving our neighbor. We're helping everyone come up higher. So don't lose hope and keep on keeping on. Like our beloved mother would always say, keep on keeping on. And like we say in our work, like we have written in our sealing prayer, we keep on keeping on until we see this work through to its final victory. And you and I and all of those who take on this teaching and apply it will be that final victory. And so thank you very much for your attention this day. Thank you very much for allowing me to share this teaching. I hope it has shed some light on what is going on and what you can do about it. And we will see you in the etheric retreats of the Masters at night. God bless you and have a most glorious and beautiful day. Thank you.